Hi, my name is Yazan Ibrahim, also known as Yazan Abu Ghosh. Today we will take about Chapter 1, Part B form CISA 1.8 Audit Evidence Collection Techniques. Audit evidence forms the bedrock of any successful information systems IS audit. But what exactly is audit evidence? Think of it as the information an IS auditor gathers to determine if an organization's systems, processes, or data are aligned with established criteria and objectives. It's the auditor's proof, the foundation for all conclusions made during the audit. Now, the significance of this can't be overstated. Without proper evidence, any claims or findings made in an audit wouldn't hold water. This isn't just good practice, it's a requirement. Audit conclusions must be based on evidence that is sufficient, relevant, and competent, words you'll hear often in the world of auditing. So, how does an IS auditor go about collecting this evidence? The methods are just as varied as the evidence itself. Observing processes, conducting interviews, reviewing documentation, analyzing test results. These are just some of the places where valuable audit evidence might be found. Each type of evidence serves a specific purpose and holds varying degrees of reliability. Some sources are rock solid, while others might require a more skeptical eye, and this is where the artistry of auditing meets its science. Let's start with the most reliable sources of evidence. Independence, for example, plays a key role. Evidence obtained from external independent parties is like gold in the world of auditing. Think of it this way. Would you trust information about someone's financial health more if it came directly from their accountant or one of their closest friends? Probably the accountant, right? A good example of this in IS auditing is using confirmation letters from external customers or vendors to verify accounts receivable or signed contracts with third parties for review. Evidence rooted in independence is inherently less biased and more trustworthy. Qualifications also weigh heavily on an evidence's reliability. It's not just about where the evidence comes from, but whether the source is credible and qualified to provide it. Just like a doctor's recommendation holds more weight in a diagnosis than a random internet search, the expertise of the person providing audit-related information is crucial. The same rigor applies to the IS auditor themselves. If an auditor doesn't fully understand a technical area they're reviewing, it can compromise their ability to interpret or validate test results accurately. Expertise matters on both ends. Another key question: how objective is the evidence? Objective evidence, hard, undeniable facts like inventory lists or access logs, is far more reliable than evidence that requires subjective interpretation. For instance, reviewing a company's media inventory is straightforward evidence. On the flip side, analyzing the efficiency of an application based on conversations with staff introduces subjectivity. It leaves room for human error or personal interpretation. Timing also adds complexity. Some evidence, especially in dynamic environments, is only accurate and useful for a limited period. Imagine relying on a data analysis from a spreadsheet that's constantly updated without proper version control. If the evidence isn't captured and preserved at the right time, it may no longer reflect the reality, or worse, it could be irretrievably lost. The IS auditor must always weigh two critical factors when assessing evidence: quality and quantity. Quantity alone isn't enough. Imagine filling a library with hundreds of random books. If none of them relate to your research topic, it doesn't matter how many you have. They're useless. The same applies to audit evidence. It needs to be competent, meaning valid and relevant, and there needs to be enough of it to make a sound judgment. A skilled IS auditor knows when this balance has been achieved, often relying on a mix of experience and intuition. Now let's explore the fascinating techniques used by IS auditors to gather this evidence. Each technique is a unique tool, chosen depending on the scope and objective of the audit. For starters, reviewing an organization's IS structures. Why is this important? The structure of an IS organization often tells a story about how duties are segregated and whether sufficient control mechanisms are in place. Take, for instance, an organization heavily reliant on distributed processing or end-user computing. Its IT functions might be structured very differently from the classic setup of separate systems and operations teams. By understanding these structures, an auditor is essentially taking a first step to assess how well controls are implemented across the organization. Another common technique is analyzing IS policies and procedures. Policies aren't just check-the-box documents. They are the operational blueprint that defines how an organization achieves its goals while managing risks. An auditor evaluates whether these policies are clearly defined, understood by staff, and actually followed in day-to-day operations. Even more crucially, they check if management is actively involved in the formulation and review of these policies. Policies that simply sit in a file cabinet or on a website nobody reads aren't worth much. Then there's reviewing IS standards and documentation. Think about this. Documentation is the story of an organization's IT infrastructure and processes. It could be physical papers or digital files. From user manuals to business continuity plans to program change logs, these records are evidence that helps paint a clear picture of how things operate. An auditor doesn't just skim these documents, they dig deep, tracing changes, evaluating integrity controls, and sometimes uncovering gaps like outdated SLAs or missing security metrics. Interviews are another cornerstone of evidence collection, but these aren't your typical small talk conversations, far from it. A well-conducted audit interview is methodical, prepared in advance with a clear set of objectives. The IS auditor might use a checklist or a structured form to guide the discussion. Importantly, these interviews aren't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. Instead, they're about creating a safe space where employees feel comfortable sharing insights, concerns, and knowledge. Always remember, interviews should inform, not intimidate. And what about observations? Picture an auditor quietly stepping back to watch employees in action. Observing the performance of duties can reveal a lot, like whether the person responsible for a specific task is indeed the one performing it or if procedures match the documented policies. However, observation has its pitfalls. People behave differently when they know they're being watched, which can skew results. Still, with careful documentation and follow-up, observation provides evidence that can be invaluable, especially in physical security assessments. One of the most powerful techniques is reperformance. It's just what it sounds like. The auditor redoes a task or control to confirm that it works as intended. This hands-on testing delivers highly reliable evidence because the auditor sees the results firsthand. No third-person accounts, no assumptions, just verifiable outcomes. Finally, there's the walkthrough. Think of it as the auditor taking a guided tour through a process or control to ensure understanding. It's detailed, step-by-step, and interactive. Oftentimes, walkthroughs reveal discrepancies or potential breakdowns in a process that might otherwise go unnoticed. By combining these techniques, the IS auditor collects a treasure trove of evidence. But here's the key. Not all evidence is equally valuable to the audit's objectives. Some may seem relevant at first glance, but ultimately lead down unproductive paths. A good auditor keeps their eyes on the overarching goals, sifting through peripheral noise to find the evidence that truly matters. In sum, gathering evidence is equal parts detective work, technical skill, and critical thinking. It's about asking the right questions, using the right tools, and always keeping the broader objectives in mind. Every document reviewed, process observed, or interview conducted adds a piece to the puzzle, culminating in a comprehensive audit that goes beyond compliance to provide real value. By mastering these techniques, IS auditors play a crucial role in safeguarding organizations, their systems, and their data. Thank you for watching, and as always, continue learning, stay curious, and we'll see you next video.